Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toronto Friday Lunch. I am Prince Kumar, your club president. And today it is my pleasure to welcome all of you as we celebrate International Women's Day. Next, we're going to have our traditional dance, invocation, and then I will ask you to stand for the playing of our national anthem and a Rotary toast. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that we're at the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples who have walked and cared for this land for 15,000 years. They include the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Treaty Peoples of the Mississauga of the Credit. As Rotarians, let us lend a hand to help those in dire need. Let us develop projects that provide food, clothing, and shelter to improve the quality of life for all impoverished community members, giving at-risk children and youth a better start in life. Let us lend a hand to reach out to people of all cultures, races, and religions of the world. Let us lend a hand in our vocations to uphold high ethical standards and encourage others to do the same. Now, I will ask that everyone stands as we play the national anthem, and this is from a Grammy Award winner, Ricky Kej, an environmentalist. To peace around the world. Please be seated. We have a fantastic head table today. And if you're here with me in person, I'd like you to stand. If you're there virtually, you don't have to stand. We've got Sarah Huey, Rotarian since 2019, classification, government admin, economy, team lead, Ontario Ministry of Economic Development, job creation and trade member of our Research and Appeals Committee. Now, Sarah was a Rotaractor before she joined, and even when she was a Rotaractor, she was so involved in Rotary that, I remember her being at Youth Expo, I remember her being at Youth and Children's Services. She has just continued to outperform in every single committee that she gets on board. Thank you, Sarah, for your service. Kurt Grossland, Rotarian since 2013. Kurt is retired, our club board director and treasurer, champion of the working group. Now, not only is Kurt passionate about environment, as you heard today, he ensures our books are kept up to date, and that is very, very important, especially we've been growing quite a bit. So thank you, Kurt, for your service. Christina Benyak, with me here at the table, Rotarian since 2002, retired, member of our events committee, sponsor of our new member. Christina, if you give her a job to do, it will get done. She wants projects, so hey, if you're looking for project work, Christina is your girl. Abigail Brown, our new member, who will be formally introduced shortly. Bill Marari, Rotarian since 1999. Club management classification. Bill is the general manager and president and COO of the National Club, this beautiful venue that we come in every single Friday. He's also a club past president, co-chair of our member engagement committee, and as you can see in that picture, he wants some wine recommendations. Here's your guy to talk to, sponsor of our new member. And our new member is Kwami, who's joining us virtually, who will be formally introduced shortly. Ingrid Graham, Director of Development at Nellie's, our impact reporter, who will also be formally introduced shortly. Neil Phillips, Rotarian since 1998, Classification Logistics Management, President of DGN Marketing Services, Club Past President, past District Governor, Co-Chair of Program Committee, host to our keynote speaker. Wow, Neil, with all of that, how do you still run the wine club every single week? Excellent. Thank you again for your service. Kathleen McLaughlin, our keynote speaker, who will be formally introduced shortly. Rotarians and guests, our head table. Now, I hear we do have quite a few guests and visiting Rotarians from various different clubs joining us. I don't know if Kathleen's aware or not, but I understand her husband is joining us as well, who also is a wine connoisseur. There seems to be a wine theme going on around here. Maybe something to do with Neil. We'll leave it at that, but let's see. All right. To our visiting Rotarians, thank you for choosing our club for your makeup. We hope you're enjoying your meeting. To all our guests, welcome to our meeting. And if you want to get involved in Rotary, let's go to the website, click on that join button, and one of our member engagement committee members will be glad to start a conversation with you and see how you can make a difference in this world with Rotary. Rotarians, please welcome our visitors and guests in the tradition of our great club. Now, most of you members know this already, and this is really mainly for our virtual audience. You should know that our meetings are recorded. That includes all videos and chats. So if you do not want to show up on our social media, please turn off your cameras or maintain a professional image at all times. We will not be able to edit you out at a later time. From time to time, we take a pause and we reflect on what Rotary has done. We reflect on what members have done. And today is one of those days. Our Awards and Honors Committee has been busy. They start looking at potential members for a particular award, perhaps once a year. Some years, we may not even get someone to get this particular award. The award that I'm talking about is a 5 Sapphire Paul Harris and William Peace Award. This award is made to Rotarians for the highest level of service to the club over a number of years, or for outstanding contribution. Now, in other Rotary clubs, you can get a Paul Harris if you're donating $1,000 to the Rotary International. At our club, that doesn't happen. Instead, it's only given out, and I'll read out some of the criterias. It's only given out to someone who has had a Club Builder Award initially, only given out to someone who's got at least 10 years of service to the club, and they've been judged for their accomplishments for this particular award. To get this award, you can only have a maximum of 1 or 2 recipients throughout the year, and in some years, we do not even appoint a recipient. So I'm very pleased today to introduce our Paul Harris recipient. And the club and the foundation make a donation to Rotary International for $6,000 in their honor. 6,000 US, that is. So this particular Rotarian has been, you name a committee, they've been on that committee. They've certainly won a Club Builder Award. They've been a member of member engagement. Not just a member, they've chaired it. They've been a member of community service. Not just a member, they've chaired it. They've been an avid participant of SCUGOG. They've been on the board, not just once, twice. They've been a liaison director to our membership and engagement committee. They've been our member of our strategic planning committee. You would also recognize this particular member with their service outside of the club. They've been leading an organization for the last 3 years outside of the club, apart from their full-time job, that has about 200 volunteers and has involved our club heavily with serving over 100,000 meals across this great city. I think some of you might have guessed who this individual is. I asked one of their best friends, tell me a little bit about, what this individual really wants to do. And they said, they want to leave a legacy of volunteer work. And I have this great privilege and honor to present to you our next 5 Sapphire, Paul Harris, and William Peace Award recipient, none other than my friend and partner in service, Lori Brazier. We already have super. Get a couple of pictures, Lori.
Perfect.
Floor is yours.
Wow. Well, certainly wasn't expecting this, and thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It's my Rotary journey, 15 years now, almost 16, about 15 and a half, has definitely changed my life. My father was a Rotarian. He'd be very happy today. I wish he could be here. Rotary changed his life, and I always kind of said, yeah, what does that mean, really? How can an organization change your life? But it really does. So I'm very grateful for this award, and I thank you all. And I look forward to another 15 years, maybe another 30 years, if I can be like Jack Robertson. Why not? Anyways, thank you. Thank you, Prince.
And while Lori's taking her seat, we do have a very special release of our Rotary Minute video number 12.
So as you can probably see from some of these pictures, we have a lot of fun together. Don't get me wrong, this is definitely a ton of work. We rehearse 3 times a week for approximately 3 to 4 months leading up to showtime. But we somehow always manage to pull off a show that we can be proud of.
A work desk behind me with my prized Star Wars Lego figures that I sell and collect. And behind me are parts. Yeah, I part out a bunch of different sets when I'm bored or when I'm stressed or when I'm listening to an audiobook. And I put them in here, and they are all for sale on a store online. It's like playing, but it's a little profitable business too.
For more information, follow the Rotary Club of Toronto to learn how together we can make a difference.
Thank you, Christina, and the Marketing and Communications Committee for producing these videos. And a reminder to all our members, do like and share them on your social media. Every time you do that, we get new potential members just like today. And we're so glad to welcome them today as well. Now, we're going to move ahead with our keynote speaker segment before we continue on with other aspects. So for our keynote speaker segment today, I'm pleased to welcome Neil Phillips, our past club president, on the stage to introduce our keynote speaker. Neil, over to you.
Thank you, President Prince, and hopefully before long I will actually be there in person again as well. In the maelstrom of tragic events of the past week, most have been distraught by the rapidly deteriorating situation. However, this week also saw the release of a new report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Our environmental global crisis has been building for years, nay, decades, and only very recently is there a slight semblance of semi-commitment from governments to avoid calamity. Many of the impacts of global warming are now simply irreversible, according to the UN's latest assessment. Humans and nature are being pushed beyond their abilities to adapt. But the authors of this new report also say that there is still a brief window of time to avoid the very worst. That very worst includes forced migration on a scale as yet unseen, global turmoil, and vast devastation. None of these impacts are distributed equally amongst the world's population. If the problem is so large, how can we be part of the solution, as Rotarians are wont to be? Well, it's not all up to the governments. Consumers and businesses can play a significant and vital role. Kathleen McLaughlin is Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer for Walmart Inc. However, she also sits on the board of directors for the World Wildlife Fund, the World Resources Institute, is a member of the NatureVest Advisory Board, and works regularly with organizations like the Nature Conservancy and Conservation International. Listed by Forbes among the world's 50 greatest leaders, sounds like a fantastic possible Rotarian, she is also president of the Walmart Foundation. Kathleen will provide some insight into positive ways we, and all businesses, can help make a difference. It should be noted that I first met Kathleen over a glass of wine, no surprise, produced from a biodynamic vineyard and a shared meal of local, sustainably farmed produce provided by Enville. From our early conversations, I'm delighted she agreed to speak with us today. Rotarians and guests, please join me in welcoming Kathleen to our virtual lectern. Over to you, Kathleen.
Rotary Club of Toronto. I thought I would give a few remarks about the role of business in society in addressing issues like climate change, equity, and nature, which is closely related to some of the challenges with climate, and use them as a way to illustrate what has been a very profound shift over the last 10 years in the broader understanding of the role of business in society. And, it's a shift that I would characterize as moving from a mindset of perhaps social responsibility to a recognition that the integrated nature of life on the planet, environmental concerns, social concerns, economic concerns, we're addressing.
Kathleen, sorry, we're not hearing you that well.
And I want to think of the planet as a stakeholder, to just sustain as a business, to have a long-term viable proposition as a business. And in fact, businesses and capital markets in general are recognizing that effective strategies that address those critical societal issues are essential not only for survival, but actually can position businesses to be distinctive in terms of their success going forward. And that's been a massive shift in the last 10 years. It really explains the advent of what many people will call the ESG movement. That's just a little piece of it that pertains to having good strategies for these issues and being able to disclose progress and so on. But it's a much broader, deeper shift. And I hope to illustrate that through some practical examples from Walmart, not by way of a commercial for Walmart by any means, but just a way to bring this home and make it real for people in terms of a business like Walmart, which is a retailer, going after things like climate and equity and nature. So I want to start with climate, and Neil, you kind of got into this. And by the way, I should say, I really appreciated Kurt's remarks and some of the things you have going at the Rotary Club of Toronto. That's exactly the kind of thing that we need in every part of society to get after some of these things. But I'd like to start with climate, and you're right, the IPCC did come out with their most recent installment of their global assessment on the science of climate. This particular report focused on the human impacts of climate change. And I just want to touch on a few headlines to then go into the discussion of, all right, so what's business doing about this? And then I'll come around to equity in nature. So yes, it turns out, unfortunately, based on the roundup of science from around the world, and this is peer-reviewed science across thousands of scientists who participate in putting together this synthesized report, that warming is worse than we thought it would be so far, both in degrees, where we're now 1.1 degrees Celsius above the average temperature in pre-industrial times, but also the impacts. So not only average rise in temperature, but things like drought, storm intensity, what people call extreme weather events. So, we would have seen in the last year the mile-wide tornado that went for 200 miles in the US, that sort of thing. Atmospheric rivers, which are not new, but the frequency of atmospheric river events and literally dumping buckets of water onto communities and dwelling longer than they would have in the past, those kind of phenomena. And so these physical effects are worse than would have been modeled or anticipated by the scientists, even 5 years ago. And so the human effects of those are also worse than people would have anticipated. And so, it is things like displacements of populations, Neil, due to food and water shortages. And what doesn't get talked a lot about, but we'll come back to it when we talk about nature. Why am I saying nature? Well, it turns out that since 1970, we have seen a die-off in species of 68% of animal populations. And by animal, I mean everything from bugs to, lemurs to whales. 68% decline in animal populations globally as sampled by World Wildlife Fund across 3,000 different kinds of species systematically, 15,000 spots around the globe since 1970. That puts us into the 6th mass extinction event that we know of on the planet, and that includes the dinosaurs. And this one is caused by people. So we are looking at pretty, cataclysmic losses in a very serious situation in terms of the viability of the planet, just from a physical, biological, perspective. And so what it means is that the threshold temperature beyond which we really don't want to go as a planet is 1.5 degrees. Warming. We're already at 1.1. And if you think back to the Paris Agreement, if you remember that, at that time, people thought 2 degrees was the ceiling. Well, they brought it down now to 1.5 degrees to say, actually, we don't want to go beyond that to avoid some of the worst impacts of climate change. And, they've tried to do some modeling to say, well, what happens beyond 1.5 degrees? What happens if we actually do exceed that threshold? And in the report, what they talk about is an incremental 9 million deaths per year on the planet over and above average annual death rates. To your point, Neil, real winners and losers. It will affect everybody on the planet, though. So don't think that, if you're a winner, you're safe. It's not good for the winners either. But about half the planet is extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, where they would be facing chronic food and water shortages. So about 3 billion people would literally have no water in the zones where they live today. And so, these are very profound effects. Another physical effect is rising sea level, which will inundate very large swaths of coasts in North America and obliterate small island nation states. So Marshall Islands, Antigua, these kind of island states will just be underwater. And then, of course, declining yields, agricultural yields, certain crops, for example, coffee, in the worst scenarios beyond 1.5 degrees don't exist anymore, because there isn't going to be a zone on the planet where coffee will have favorable conditions to grow at all. We can't move it somewhere else. So that's the kind of future we face without immediate, significant, large-scale action on emissions and, as it turns out, restoration of critical ecosystems, forests, oceans, grasslands, and so on. So the growing realization of this, it started to dawn on people back in kind of 2008, 2009, in the wake of the financial crisis, as more of this science was coming out. And if you remember, 2008, we lived through a global event, which was the financial meltdown. And the investment community, capital markets community, business community began to realize that topics that might have been viewed as the purview of social responsibility in the past, like the environment or even social issues, were actually at a scale now of consequence. That means they are, determinative of future business success, by the way, let alone the rest of us just as human beings on the planet, right? But if you want to take a very narrow view and say, okay, business success, these things become financially material. And there are actually a number of Canadians that we can credit with really galvanizing this broader movement around climate action in particular, but then it extends to multiple other environmental and social issues through business, through the economy. One of them is Mark Carney, who was leading the Financial Stability Board in the wake of the financial crisis. And he launched what is now known as the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Risk Disclosure, which is a global movement to recognize the materiality of climate in business, in capital markets, and really expect every company to do a risk assessment of the factors we're talking about. What would it mean for the business in terms of customer communities, supply chains, employees, other things that drive risk and future success, and create business strategies to tackle those that would articulate, number one, what was the approach to the climate risk assessment? Number two, what's the strategy to mitigate as well as adapt to climate change? Meaning every company is expected to have a plan to reduce emissions and do their part based on whatever business it is to help the world get to where we need to get to stay within 1.5 degrees. And by the way, that works out to net zero emissions by 2040 or 2050, which means no emissions coming off the planet on a net basis. So if there's some residual emissions that can't be dealt with, they have to be offset through reforestation or other natural, solutions, or sucked out of the environment through some kind of carbon sequestration. So that's an expectation. And then governance strategy, and then action plans and disclosures around all those things. That is essentially become the norm now. And in fact, the Securities and Exchange Commission, as we speak, is contemplating new rulemaking where they will be requiring disclosures by every publicly traded company in the US, listed in the US, around emissions strategy and actual footprint and things like that. We'll see what they actually require, but that's our sense of where that's going to go. So others have started to do analysis about, for the economy as a whole, what will it take in terms of investment to get from where we are today to net zero by 2050? There's an interesting analysis that McKinsey did, and full disclosure, that's my alma mater, but it's a good piece of work by some former colleagues that they just published. And they reckon that the world economy is going to need an incremental $3.5 trillion per year of investment between now over the next 30 years. So each of the next 30 years, $3.5 trillion incremental investment. So $100 trillion of incremental investment to help us do the transition of the global economy to where we need to be. And, what are those transitions? They're the ones we've been reading about: massive energy transition out of fossil fuels into renewable energy. That's the biggest one. But also transitions of agriculture, of cities, infrastructure in the built environment, to get where we need to get. Also, what the scientists are now saying is that we will need to conserve or restore at least 30% of terrestrial, like land cover on the planet and a bunch in the oceans, to have the ecosystems that we'll need to just do their job of absorbing carbon. So think about forests absorbing carbon every year and so on. So if you think back to previous global discussions around conservation, the world has been operating on an assumption that we need to get to 17% of the land being preserved as nature. Now people are saying 30. And in this latest IPCC report, they're now saying, gosh, if we go past 1.5 degrees, nature becomes less productive, less effective at being able to deal with carbon. And so we're going to need to be at 50% conservation of ecosystems. So that's a significant increase. So how does this then I should say a couple of other Canadians I want to recognize. So I'd mentioned Mark Carney, a couple of others. Catherine McKenna, who was the environment minister, has been a massive force for helping bring together government and business around this agenda and also elevate this on the agenda of Dominic Barton, who is Canadian and was the managing director of McKinsey, Mark Wiseman, who was at CPP, and who really helped galvanize capital markets institutions around the climate agenda. So just, briefly, to give you some examples then, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, how does this look for a business like Walmart? And Walmart's a pretty basic business, right? We're a retailer. We sell bananas, T-shirts, we're providing food and apparel and general merchandise for folks all over, Canada and in the US and a few other places. And our whole goal is just to help people live their daily lives, right? We don't sell fancy things. We sell a bunch of basics that you just need to kind of eat and run your household. But for us, this is a serious thing. So, our strategy includes all the things I mentioned in terms of governance and climate risk assessment and so on. And as we did our own risk assessment, we could see the impacts on our business in terms of 50% of our customer communities over the next 20, 30 years, based on that, warming scenario of going beyond 1.5 degrees, will have significant long-term disruption due to these extreme events. 50% of our customer communities around the world. Supply chains. We looked at 25 different commodities to understand, all right, what are the choke points and what's at risk? Half of them, significant risk of yields, availability. I mentioned coffee, there are many others like that. That's significant. Disaster and storm damage to facilities, damage to, distribution centers and so on. That's also significant if you roll the tape forward. So those are the kinds of effects we could see long term. In terms of our strategy, mitigation and adaptation. So on mitigation, that means doing our part to help the world transition to zero carbon approaches to production and consumption. Who better to try to take a shot at that than a big consumption platform like Walmart? That's what we do. We have products, people buy them and use them. So we are working with our suppliers and with our customers to decarbonize the production of food, decarbonize the production of electronics, of apparel, of all the things that you would buy at a Walmart, and to make that the new way business gets done. So it's not a special come and buy from our sustainable assortment. It's super expensive. No, everything needs to go this way. It's a transformation. And so to get at it, we have what's called a science-based target, which means we've worked with scientists to set goals around actual emissions reduction in our own operations and in the supply chain. For our own operations, that means our electricity, our energy efficiency, our heavy tractor trailer trucks, our refrigeration for all those freezer cases and refrigeration cases and so on. And we're right on pace with that. We have reduced our carbon intensity by over 30% since we started a few years ago. Our absolute emissions have come down right in line with what they need to be to get to zero emissions by 2040 in our business. It's a lot of hard work. It's not going to be easy. There are going to be bumps along the way, but that's underway. In the supply chain, this is much more complex because, as I say, it's every product we sell. It's emissions from factories, from agriculture, from transportation, you name it, baked into the products that you and I enjoy every single day. So to get at that, we launched something called Project Gigaton. Why? Because when we did the math, we need to reduce a gigaton of emissions by 2030 and then keep on going right down to net zero by 2050. So we now have over 4,000 suppliers engaged with us in decarbonizing product supply chains globally. 1,500 of them have serious commitments and disclose and report to us their progress. And that a year ago represented 2/3 of our business on a revenue basis. It's much higher now. We'll be releasing updated numbers soon. So they're engaged and they're working on this. And we set up the program with scientists to say, all right, whether you sell apparel or bananas or whatever it is, there are 6 arenas of action. We want you to set a goal and work on reducing emissions in practical ways in energy, in nature, so agriculture, forests, ocean interactions, if it's seafood, that sort of thing, packaging, product design. So think about laundry detergent that works in cold water as well as hot water, that lowers emissions in terms of product use. So that would be a product innovation to lower emissions, and P&G is heavily advertising that. If you watch TV, you might have seen some of their ads recently. It's an important innovation, just as one example. Waste reduction, so food waste, other forms of waste, which off gases and creates, emissions, and transportation. So we are working with our suppliers in every single one of those pillars to identify business actions that are practical, that then translate to emissions reduction, and then help them take those actions and disclose. And then we support them with special programs. So for example, Snider Electric, we did a aggregate power purchase agreement for renewable energy in the US that our suppliers can buy into. Affordable energy, they can do it without having their own procurement team. It helps them go faster to transition to renewable energy, that kind of thing. Packaging playbook, how to get out of packaging, how to substitute packaging for lower waste, lower emissions alternatives. Very, very practical. I mean, that's what we do, as a retailer, we're practical people. So that program so far, we have publicly disclosed a year ago that it's delivered more than 400 million metric tons emissions reduction in decarbonizing chains. And these are, meant to be permanent changes of the way people produce this. So it starts to accumulate over time. So we're well on our way to the billion, and we'll, obviously we'll keep going. So that's how we're tackling emissions. This then also, adaptation, there's a whole agenda for us around surety of supply and supply chains, disaster resilience in our building codes, all the community resilience, all those kind of things, which I won't have time to go into now, but that is a big part of our strategy. And then policy, advocating for policy at the federal level, at the provincial and state level in different jurisdictions that would help us enable a transition around zero emissions more quickly. And then, of course, disclosure. All of this is online. We disclose our progress and the projects and what the emissions are and everything online. And we think that's something all businesses should do. And, as I say, it's going to start to get regulated if people aren't doing it yet. That's climate. So it's a similar idea on other major social and environmental issues. And we have 4 broad arenas that our stakeholders say matter to them, and they believe it should be on our docket. They think it's relevant for our business. So opportunity for people, which includes economic opportunity, income inequality. We got a lot of hourly people that get a start at Walmart. How do we help them move up? How do we help them succeed and prosper? That kind of thing. Equity, racial equity, gender equity, and so on. Sustainability, so social and environmental issues, as I mentioned. Community issues, so cohesion of communities, resilience, food security, disaster preparedness, all those type of things. And then finally, ethics and integrity as a business, especially as an international business. So role modeling highest standards of compliance, ethics, integrity in our dealings, digital citizenship, cybersecurity, we're an omni-channel, data-driven business too, those kind of things. So that's our broader agenda. But I would say the big 3 right now: climate, nature, equity. So I'm just going to talk a bit about equity and nature. I'll start with nature. So I already mentioned the bad news about nature, which is, we've really degraded our ecosystems in our manner of living. And so again, as a retailer, we said, well, how, what can we do about that? Well, a fair amount, because pretty much everything we sell goes back to nature somewhere, right? It came from a forest or a field, a grassland, or an ocean, or fresh water, right? If you think about beef, row crops, coffee, tea, seafood, even cotton, it all comes from somewhere. So we worked with Conservation International to map our supply chain back to source in a dozen of the major commodities that go back to these ecosystems. And it worked out to 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean, mostly tuna and salmon. We don't sell a lot of other seafood at Walmart, pretty basic on those commodities. So mapped it back and then said, okay, let's set a goal that we're going to conserve, restore, and or better manage 50 million acres of land connected to these supply chains and 1 million square miles of ocean. And we're going to do it in 3 ways. Number 1, we're going to, in our own sourcing for Walmart branded items or stuff that you would just see in the produce aisle, or, like the tuna, the seafood, the meat, and so on. Let's work in the chains to better produce those goods in a way that has better impacts on nature. So at a minimum, it would be things like certifications, right? Like marine stewardship certification and so on, but that's table stakes. Where we want to get to eventually is we're working in the source regions at an even higher standard in terms of environmental standards and social standards in a way that is producing livelihoods for the local community, and then also adhering to environmental standards, doing conservation and restoration in adjacent regions, preventing additional conversion by having more productive production in the lands that are under production. So that's really the way of the future. And we have some projects going, for example, in tuna with the people of the Marshall Islands, the Republic of Marshall Islands and their government, to create a tuna industry in the Marshall Islands, which doesn't exist today. They have the fishing rights, but it's people from other countries coming and fishing. So a local industry around that. And it's now about 25% of our great value tuna comes from there, and we're working with them to scale it. So it's jobs, environmental standards, and a great product for our customers. We have a really tiny example project of something along those lines in Canada with smoked salmon coming from one of the First Nations in BC. So it's Klemto smoked salmon. You can buy it at Walmart now. Very tiny in terms of total production volume, but that's the kind of thing where, okay, it's great livelihood for the First Nations people who are managing that ecosystem. It's in terms of environmental standards and social standards, and helps them with their broader conservation roadmap. It's an important economic part of their broader roadmap. So those are a couple examples. In the beef chain, a second lever we pull is, so I talked about our own sourcing, is engaging our own suppliers who are branded. So the branded suppliers and their chains and what they can be doing differently. And we've created right in Project Gigaton, that same platform, some specific calculators that translate their actions into nature outcomes. So biodiversity outcomes, soil health outcomes, water quality outcomes, and so on. And so our beef suppliers, as an example, are working in their own chains to replicate these kind of gains right back through the chain. And then the third set of tools we're using are philanthropy, our policy, advocacy, and so on. So for example, we gave a grant to World Wildlife Fund, about $5 million, to work in the Northern Great Plains with cattle ranchers to restore prairie grasslands to their original state. And they're still grazing cattle, but native grasses, different edge of field practices, other approaches that help enhance the soil health, restore the local biodiversity, and still allow them to be part of the beef chain. So those are examples in nature. And 60 seconds on equity, we could spend the whole day on equity. And I don't mean to suggest it's a less important topic, but I'm just conscious of time. Same thing. So if you consider gender equity, racial equity, and so on, what are the assets of a business like Walmart? We have our jobs, we have on-the-job skill development, we have promotions and career paths, we have our hiring practices, and so on. So pointing those toward communities that are underrepresented, and that's not new. I mean, probably all of you in this room who are engaged in business, you've been working on that for a while. But we're trying to put it on steroids to say, okay, how do we invest in additional upskilling that would accelerate advancement and so on? So for example, in Canada, 35% of our store managers are women. It was 15% just 5 years ago. So we are focused on a massive acceleration. And we're focused on the Black population, on Indigenous people in particular, on women. And I don't mean to suggest we're leaving behind other folks, so LGBTQ plus and people with disabilities and so on, but really, really focused on the tools we've got to accelerate progress on those through our own jobs. And then making investments through philanthropy in the broader workforce arena to reinforce and take down barriers. So for example, we gave a $500,000 grant here in Canada, US dollars, to the Information and Communications Technology Council. That's specifically to understand gaps faced by Black and Indigenous Canadians for advancement in the Canadian economy. Or work with York University. So Dr. Jean Augustine, who's the chair in education there, who's focused on why do Black students in Canadian universities have a much lower graduation rate. How do we close that gap? So we're trying to invest in the broader talent pipeline, as well as through our own jobs to accelerate advancement and representation. And again, we publish what are our stats, what is our percentage of representation at different levels. We are, I would say, much better than the average company in terms of outcomes, but a long way to go. So for example, we have 9% of our global officers are Black. But, in the US, 13% of the population is Black. So there's a gap there. But if you look at Fortune 500, I think it's like 3%. So we got a long way to go, but we're trying to lead on this and kind of bring others along. our supply chain sourcing. That's a big source of economic capital and a way to elevate. We issued a green bond last year, $2 billion green bond, and we worked with diverse book runners to do that deal. So that's an asset you might not think of, right? But we could have worked with any book runner. How hard was it to say, hey, let's work with some diverse book runners and really promote, along with Citibank and Bank of America, right? But we had a sort of collective. So I guess I'd just say in closing, the key point I wanted to get across is integration. And that we're not in a world anymore where we say, well, business just makes some money for shareholders through who knows how, and government does this other stuff, policy setting, and then everybody else tries to figure, like, we're in a world of integration where all of us need to say from our perch in society, whether it's business or civil society or government, what are the tools we have in our toolbox and how do we put those to use to accelerate progress on the biggest issues that are our collective issues as a society in a way that strengthens our institutions. So again, I'm not talking about social responsibility, although we all feel that way, but it's more about, these things all make more sense for Walmart as a business. It's how we are going to be successful. And by the way, when we bake it into the way we do business, we can do it all day long. We can scale it. We can expand it because it just becomes part of this shared success or what people call shared value. So I'm going to close there, Neil. Thanks for having me here. And I'm going to hand it back, I guess, to President Prince for
Thank you, Kathleen.
The next item on the agenda.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. First off, it's quite incredible that you've really taken on that leadership role in Walmart, having spent a fair amount of my career as well in retail and supply chain and managing large supply chain logistics. I know what a mammoth task that is. So thank you, first of all, for doing that. Now, you talk about, and of course, we all know about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You've talked about net zero. The question really, is it really doable? We've talked about these goals and we've been pushing the goals out as well a bit. Is it really doable and is it really realistic?
Well, let me just focus on one of them, which is net zero by 2050. Unfortunately, we can't backload this, right? We can't say, well, let's do nothing. And then starting in 2040, we'll work on this stuff. It has to be now, like the progress toward that. I don't know. I'm an optimist. I like to hope that technology innovation will play a big part that we can't even predict now. It has in the past, right? There's so many examples of where technology surprised us and helped us accelerate something in society. And I think we also have many examples in society where a shift built and built and built, and then boom, something busted through it and happened quickly. Look at gay marriage in the US, for example, right? It kind of lumbered and nobody thought it was going to happen, and then boom, it happened. So I pin my hopes on those kinds of, phenomena. Without them, we're not going to make it at this point, just given the momentum line and what people have committed to do. The war right now in Ukraine and Russia, that's obviously not helpful. Maybe there's a silver lining where $120 oil makes renewables very attractive, but it also makes a lot of dirty fossil fuel projects attractive too. So, and it's a huge waste of human capital and suffering on a massive scale, which is not helpful in any of this. So I am an optimist and I do have hope in some of these, but take a look at that McKinsey report. If you want to see, is this doable or not, just from an economic perspective, what needs to happen here, it's quite significant.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, with COVID, we've seen mega grants. We've seen governments come together and really help and support. And does that provide the silver lining that you're talking about, the hope that if it has to be done, if it must be done, it can be done? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And for many people, the experience of COVID as a global phenomenon that affected everyone was really instructive, right? Like it was a lived experience of exactly this kind of phenomenon with climate or equity, where it affects all of us and we all need to be part of the solution. So I do think that got people thinking much differently. I think the challenge with climate or with equity is we need to move faster than we are. And unlike COVID, where you're thinking, okay, I can see the death rate and it's now, and I have to act now to prevent tomorrow's deaths. these things, you got to act now to prevent something that's going to be 10 years out or 20 to some extent, even though, yes, the effects are being felt now. They get really bad later. That's the challenge.
And my final question is, you've certainly, working with one of the largest corporations in the world, taken that leadership role. And, the piece becomes, are other corporations really taking a similar pattern? And then a follow-up to that is, what can individuals really do? What's your advice to people here? What can they actually do here?
Yeah. So I do see many, many other companies moving in this direction. I just look at our own suppliers. The fact that we now have the vast majority of our sales covered by companies that are really working hard on this. And it's not just because we ask them to, they really see all the same things we see. So that does give me, a lot of hope. In terms of what can we do? Oh, there's so much. So each of us has probably a role, that might be more of a professional role. So if you're in government policy, please, if you're in business, the types of things I was just talking about, if you're in civil society, partnering with others like us to help us go faster. As individuals, people in households and so on, practically speaking, energy transition is far and away the biggest thing that's needed. 3/4 of the carbon dioxide is from energy. So transitioning as quickly as you can off of fossil fuels would be the number one thing. And that's in every aspect of your life, heating and transportation and so on. Second, about 1/4 of emissions come from land use. So your dietary choices, beef and lamb, for example, are some of the highest emitting choices. And we can all still eat beef, but you might consider the frequency. And are there other things, that would be lower personal footprint, in terms of emissions? Planting trees, they need to be the right kind of trees in the right place, and you need to leave them there. Kurt talked about native plants and things in your backyard. That's actually a thing. If everybody in Toronto converted to native plants and so on, it would actually help biodiversity just in this region. So they're very practical things you can do at your household level, on that dimension. And then use your voice, when you're buying products or using your voice to advocate for public policy, that matters. And businesses listen to their customers in a way they probably don't listen to anybody else. And governments listen to their citizens. So use your voice.
Thank you again, Kathleen. You've not only just shared with us what you're doing in your leadership role and what Walmart is doing, but really having provided some inspirational thoughts for us in terms of what actions we can take and reinforcing the great work that the Environment Working Group here is doing as well. So thank you for your time. A donation has been made in your honor to Shelterbox Canada. Shelterbox is a cutting-edge disaster relief charity which hand-delivers shelter and supplies to families affected by natural disasters and conflict. Their signature shelter boxes and shelter kits contain the tools needed to rebuild communities and transform lives. All aid is customized to meet specific needs of the family so they can not only survive but recover from disaster. Shelterbox
thank you very much.
To ensure no family is left without shelter after disaster. Shelterbox is a Rotary International project partner. Thank you, Kathleen.
Well, thank you very much. That's very meaningful, especially now given the disaster we have unfolding before us. So thank you.
Thank you again. So on that note, I am very pleased to announce that we've been in discussions with Shelterbox Canada, and in addition to the donation that we've made in honor of Kathleen, the club and the foundation, under joint authority of myself and Rick, we approved $15,000 to Shelterbox for Ukraine aid right away. And Shelterbox now is on ground, and they do actually have emergency kits that are available, and they're looking at deploying them. In fact, Stephanie, who I believe is with us today, I just found out that she's flying over to Poland to help with that initiative as well. So incredible work there. And again, I'm really, really pleased to announce that our foundation board, our Rotary Club of Toronto Charitable Foundation, has approved, in addition to the 15 that I just talked about, another $15,000 as a matching grant. That means if you want to support, if your friends, family, organizations want to support, our club and foundation will match that dollar for dollar to go towards the aid in Ukraine via Shelterbox, and Shelterbox is a Rotary partner. Thank you to everyone who has been involved in this project. And thank you again, because I know we sent out that email yesterday, and I've already heard some great donations that have come in support of this. So thank you to everyone who's helping in this arena. And thank you, Stephanie. What wonderful work you're doing, not just here, by actually going over to Poland and helping with the refugees there. Thank you so much. Next, one of my favorite segments, our new members. Not only one, we have two new members to introduce today. First up, I would like to ask Christina Benyak to come to the stage and introduce our first new member.
Thank you, President Prince. It is now my pleasure and delight to introduce you all to Abigail Brown. Abigail was born in Montreal, and when she was 8, the family moved to Toronto. Now, about Abigail, with almost 20 years experience in marketing and communication, Abigail is currently Director of Marketing and Communications with an Ontario regulatory body, and most recently worked in the healthcare sector. She has held senior leadership positions for hospital foundations. With a focus on purpose-based organizations, particularly in the not-for-profit space, Abigail has built an impressive career at organizations such as Ovarian Cancer Canada, the Christian and Missionary Alliance in Canada, Plan International in Canada, and Community Living Ontario, with a senior manager role at Scotiabank to round out her experiences. She holds an Honours BA in English and Sociology from the University of Toronto. Abigail is an avid consumer of news and current events. She believes strongly in giving back to the community and has enjoyed volunteering with her local church, women's shelters, and other local causes, and with her alumni associations at U of T. She enjoys reading fiction and somehow endures a love-hate relationship with her very moody cat, Dee Dee. It is now my pleasure to invite Abigail to the podium to say a few words.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Christina, President Prince Kumar, and Bill, and everyone for the warm welcome. I'm really excited to join this club from the get-go, from some of the events that I was invited to. I just found the club, so many people, Donna and Christina and Lori, who we've honored today, just really welcomed me warmly. As you probably heard in my bio, philanthropy and giving back to community is really important to me. It's been something I've done in my career. It's been something I've done personally. So I was really excited to join Rotary and hear about all the philanthropic work that you're doing, and that really inspires me, and I really look forward to joining with you in these efforts. So thank you so much for the welcome today. Thank you.
Welcome again, Abigail. I'm really looking forward to serving with you. And now, I'm so pleased to have another new member join us today. So for our next new member's introduction, I'll call upon past President Bill Murari.
Well, thank you, President Prince. And this truly has been a stellar meeting. Not only we have great speakers, and we're introducing 2 new members, which is President's dream, but congratulations to Lori. I've worked with you on committee work, and that's so well-deserved. So I'm so proud of you and well-deserved. As a co-chair with Donna on the Membership Engagement Committee, it really is my pleasure to introduce our next new member today. So he's joining us virtually, and he's up on the screen there. Kwami Ahiabenu, PhD, is a man of many parts. Born in Ghana, Kwami has traveled extensively throughout the world. He is a highly effective leader with over 20 years of proven experience working in nonprofit, government, and private sectors. As a tech innovations expert, he is consulted for several international organizations and serves on a number of boards. He is a holder of the Still Biko Highway of Africa and the Foster Davies Fellowships. He served as co-chair of the African Media Forum in Geospatial Information Systems under the auspices of the United Nations Commission for Africa. In 2013, Kwami was awarded the Regan Faskel Fellowship to recognize his work in promoting democracy in Africa by the National Endowment for Democracy, USA, which was named after former President Ronald Reagan and Florida Congressman Dante Fascal. He is a great outdoor enthusiast. He loves taking brisk walks, swimming, and farming. He is also an ardent reader, gifted writer. Kwami loves to give a helping hand to others, and hopefully his membership in the Rotary Club of Toronto will help support his life of service. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in joining Kwami to our great club. And Kwami, if you'd like to say a few words, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Bill, for your kind words of introduction. I really appreciate it. I would like to say a big thank you to President Prince, Carol, and Donna for guiding me through the membership process. Even a couple of minutes ago, we had some excitement getting me on this call, so thanks very much for your work in getting me here today. I'm super excited to be a member of this great club. I'm looking forward to collectively solve together important problems at our community level, the society as a whole, and also issues that have global implications. The excitement I have, I cannot just describe it because I'm in the community now. I hope that I can make new friends, have fellowship, network, and more importantly, have fun. I think that's very important. As we help, you need to have fun. So on that note, I want to say a big thank you for welcoming me to this club today. And I want to hand over to President Prince.
Thank you again, Kwami, and I can tell you, you are going to have fun. This is a stellar club, and you're certainly going to have fun with this. So welcome, and looking forward to serving with you. Next up, we have our impact reporting segment. And for our impact reporting segment today, we've got a very special organization, Nellie's. And we've got Ingrid Graham, the Director of Development for Nellie's, as our impact reporter. Now, Ingrid began her fundraising career at United Way. She then joined the Faculty of Medicine at University of Toronto during the Great Minds for Great Medicine campaign. Then she moved on to the Women's College Hospital Foundation, Director of Leadership and Giving and Special Initiatives, one of several positions that she held while she was at that foundation. And currently, Ingrid is the Director of Development at Nellie's, an agency serving marginalized women and children, and is primarily responsible for raising funds needed to meet Nellie's funding gap and capital campaign. Now, Nellie's, some of you may recognize, is an organization that this very club helped with some seed funding back in 1973. So it was in 1973, it was one of the first women's shelter in Toronto. Nellie's was initially established for young homeless women dealing with teenage pregnancy, suicide, self-harm, crime, prostitution, ill health, and abuse. Today, Nellie's operates programs and services for marginalized women in the GTA who had an experience of violence, poverty, or homelessness. Nellie's works to lessen homelessness for women and their children, whether the cause is family violence, mental health, or other reasons. So let's hear from Ingrid what impact our recent projects are having at Nellie's and what Nellie's has been up to lately. Ingrid, over to you.
Thanks, Prince. And thank you so much. I wanted to thank you very much for having me today, especially on your event celebrating International Women's Day, because Nellie's is an organization that prides itself on being a feminist, having feminist roots. And it's always wonderful to celebrate with people who are like-minded as you are today. As you've said, Nellie's has a long relationship with the Rotary Club of Toronto, starting back in 1978, actually, when a gift of $70,000 helped us purchase the building that we were in since 1973. And throughout the years, the Rotary Club of Toronto has given us several donations. But I do want to focus on the most recent donation that came in 2021. In 2021, we were in the midst of a capital campaign, and one that required lots of organizations to think out of the box. Many organizations focus only on programs and services, but Rotary Toronto was able to see that in order to provide programs and services, you need to fund elements within a building, just the way it thought out of the box in 1978 when it helped us purchase our original building. So last year, with an investment of $10,000 from the Rotary Toronto, we were able to purchase blinds for our shelter. A lot of people will think, why are you purchasing blinds? Why does a violence against women's organization want to invest in blinds? You do that for safety. Our new building is a wonderful building that has windows, like many homes in Toronto, facing the street and facing directly into other people's homes. So the blinds, like the one that's on the screen right now, make it possible for sunlight to come in, but for us to keep a woman's identity private by having the blinds put down when needed, keep prying eyes out. The privacy and safety of our clients is one of our most pressing tool to keep women safe. So one of the main reasons that a $10,000 donation to blinds was so necessary was because Nellie's is an organization that at any given point, 1/3 of our clients are kids. Today, of our 38 residents, we have 15 children, most of them are toddlers, and toddlers around old-fashioned blinds is not a good mix. So the blinds that you're seeing on your screen now are kid-proof. They have safety cleats. There are no cords whatsoever, so kids are safe. And this is a picture of our new playroom in our shelter. And if you see through the windows, you can see that they look directly into other homes. So those blinds are usually down. But for this purpose, we had them up so you could see the new blinds that the donation supported. So you can see also that your original investment in Nellie's was to a historic building. And one of the wonderful things about a historic building is that it looks like a home. It feels like a home. The new Nellie's, with the wonderful blinds that you see, are also in a historic home. As you can look at those pictures, you can see the stained glass. So you know that the women and children who live in our shelter are living in a home, not an institution, which is very much something that we strove for when we purchased this new building. And this building is up and running. We are just been in for a little less than a month. And we hope once we are unpacked and a little bit more settled, we can have maybe a small Rotary Club of Toronto meeting in one of our meeting spaces, so you can get the full breadth of what your donation has supported. I really want to finish my talk by thanking the Rotary Club of Toronto for their foresight. I stated at the beginning that lots of organizations only want to fund program and services, and they don't realize that in order for us to provide the programs and services that help women and children, you have to have a building, and you have to have a safe building. You have to have a warm building, and you can't do that without a donation into bricks and mortars, into the things inside a building that make it a home. And thank you so much for the donation that helped provide blinds and safety for the women and children in our shelter. It's greatly appreciated, and hopefully one day you can take a little stroll through. Thank you, and back to you, President Prince. I've wanted to say that all day.
Thank you again, Ingrid. You know, it's really refreshing to see what with those pictures. I had the opportunity of going to Nellie's probably about a decade ago as an advisor there, and I'm so thrilled to see the new building and what you've been able to do. And especially thank you for all the work that you're doing for the women that need it there the most. Thank you again so much. Speaking of first, and Rotary Club, as you know, had provided some seed funding for Nellie's. What I also found out recently that our club was actually the sponsor for a Rotary Club in Kiev, in Ukraine. In fact, it was the first Rotary Club in Ukraine. Was through a Rotarian right here in this club that started Rotary there. So that's a wonderful connection. More the reason for what we're doing there, and more the reason to thank everyone for what you're about to do there in help and aid. Speaking of help and aid, right here at home, I hear we need some help and aid as well with our very own executive director, Carol. She is looking for help. She's looking for people to move boxes. You can see her there piled in our moving boxes. So she is looking for volunteers. We've got 110 years of history, folks. We need to sort through that history before we get to our new location. And by the way, I'm thrilled again to announce that we do have a new temporary location. It is very close to here at 161 Bay Street on the 26th floor, I believe. It's going to be excellent. We're going to have it for about a year. And here we've got Jack Robertson, 96 years old Rotarian, who painstakingly, with Maureen, who's also on our tech team, has been taking down that presidential wall. We have pictures there. Imagine this. We have pictures there that someone put up 92 years ago, how carefully they had to remove those pictures and preserve them. So we need a lot of help. And Carol is actually headed back to the office. So for those folks who've got a little bit of time, an hour or two, and can meet her back at the office, please do so today so she can continue with that help as we go into our new location. Next Friday, March 11th, will be a virtual meeting only. So do not show up at the National Club. Our guest speaker will be from CNIB. But please watch out for more information as it gets updated. And share the Linktree link with your guests and invite them to our next talk as well. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Do go out there and help and support whatever you can, whether it's locally or throughout the world. We are in a time where we do need Rotarians to step up, as we always have, and I'm sure we will again. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.